This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get now by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And this is the case for rereading Star Wars books. I reread more Star Wars books than I planned to in 2023, and I have no regrets. It's often hard to justify reading a book you've already read when there are so many others you haven't gotten to yet. I love Star Wars books, but I also read a lot of books that are not set in a galaxy far, far away. If I'm being honest, this podcast is responsible for most of 2023's rereads, and if I didn't have this, I'm not sure if I would have picked as many back up as I did. It surprised me how beneficial I found most of these rereads to be, so I wanted to spend some time talking about the good things that can happen when you reread a Star Wars book. Is rereading Star Wars books a waste of time or worth the effort? It could actually, potentially, be the best use of your energy and time. And now I'm going to tell you why. Number one, comfort reading counts as reading. Let me say that one more time and listen carefully this time. Comfort reading counts as reading. There is a lot of pressure in fandom to consume or have consumed every piece of available media in the franchise or franchises you consider yourself a fan of. Many fans, quote unquote fans, will tell you that if you have not read a certain Star Wars book or all the Star Wars books, you've failed to meet some kind of imaginary prerequisite to join the fan base, which is so incredibly and frustratingly not true. If you didn't already know, I like to say that the only requirement for being a Star Wars fan is that you like Star Wars. The same concept applies specifically to the books. If you've read one Star Wars book, if you've liked one Star Wars book, you're a fan. While fandom tends to put a lot of pressure on readers who want to feel part of a community to stay up to date on releases and have a sweeping knowledge of all that's come before, the concept of comfort reading is probably more common than you think. We just don't talk about it enough. Many people read for comfort, and this often takes the form of rereading books they've read before and loved. There is nothing wrong with rereading books, especially if those books provide whatever comfort you need in any given moment. Some need to escape. Others want to coax their emotions to the surface. There are dozens of reasons you might read a book you've already read. And doing this, even with Star Wars, has so many potential benefits. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Because a reread of a Star Wars book could change your whole perspective. When I reread Heir to the Jedi 4 years after first experiencing it, I saw the book in a completely new light. If you're curious to hear more about that, I do have an episode all about it that I will link in the show notes for this episode. If you didn't love a Star Wars book the first time you read it, there is of course no guarantee that rereading it will change your mind. But it could. And even if you liked a book the first time and dive into it again, it's quite possible you will gain a deeper understanding of certain characters or events, notice things you didn't before, or make connections to other Star Wars stories that didn't occur to you when you first absorbed the book in question. Another example of this, I've read the Ahsoka novel now 3 times, each in a different format, spaced several years apart. The book has meant something different to me each time I've read it, despite the actual book never changing. In the context of Star Wars, a book can hit different after multiple reads, for several reasons. 1, new media might allow us to view a particular story in a different context. Recontextualizing is, in fact, not a bad thing. One of the reasons Ahsoka was a completely different read for me the second time was because I picked it up after watching the Clone Wars finale, which came out 4 years after the book was first published in 2016. And 2, we bring to books what we're feeling and experiencing in the moment. I read Ronin in the middle of preparing for a big move across the country, and I knew even as I was reading it that I wasn't fully experiencing what the story had to offer. I was overwhelmed, distracted, and worried about life things. That book, while brilliant, requires a lot of focus and determination to really appreciate, and there's nothing wrong with that. When I read the book again someday, I can't wait to experience it when I'm in a better place, literally and figuratively, when I can give it the attention and appreciation it deserves. Sometimes a book just isn't going to do it for you the first time, and that's pretty normal, I've come to realize. My final point, and the one you're probably going to like the least, and I'm sorry about this, or maybe I'm not, but the truth hurts sometimes. The reality is, you may never read every Star Wars book, and that's okay. I'm maybe so sorry to break this to you, but it may not actually be possible to read every single Star Wars book in your lifetime. Some of you may have, or you may be close, and for that I genuinely applaud you. But with so many novels releasing every year, and this particular genre of licensed publishing having been around since the 1970s, it would be quite a feat to have read everything Star Wars publishing has to offer, especially if you go beyond just the novels. And honestly, even if you did read all of them, you'd eventually have to go back and reread some of them to remember what you may have read years ago by that point. Rereading is almost inevitable if you love these stories so much that you want to revisit details or things you may have missed. There are many fair arguments against rereading Star Wars books. There is only so much time to read, and many find their time best spent reading new books. Rereading is a very small percentage of my yearly reading personally, so I get it. Not everyone owns their Star Wars books, and library holds can take months depending on the book and where you are. Maybe you don't want to deprive someone else of the chance to read a book they haven't read yet when you already did. The potential list goes on. At the end of the day, one beautiful thing about reading Star Wars books is that you are mostly in control of your how, what, and why. If you want to reread for comfort, you can. If you want to remember a book you once loved, or re-experience a book you didn't, you can. And if you want to embark on an epic journey to read through every Star Wars book ever made, you can choose that life as well. It is completely up to you. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondam and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show through our newsletter, and Now This Is Lit. And find the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, for $1 a month you can join our Patreon. You'll get access to an exclusive monthly show and a sticker and so many more fun things that we haven't even announced yet. There are other ways to support the show as well, and those are in the show notes. Thank you as always for listening. At the very least, it means the world that you're supporting the work we're doing here by listening to the final product. For more book reviews and Star Wars book celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.